in a reality I never imagined I'd face. I, a 32-year-old man, found myself reeling from a discovery that shattered the fragile trust I had in my marriage. I had tied the knot with Janet, now 26, 3 years ago. Together, we were raising our infant daughter, just 7 months old. Life, though chaotic with the responsibilities of new parenthood, had settled into a routine. A routine built on shared responsibilities, late-night feedings, and dreams of a future that, until recently, felt solid and intact. That structure fell apart in an instant. It happened on an otherwise ordinary morning, one that started like many others. Janet was in the shower, and our baby girl began crying relentlessly, clearly in need of a diaper change. I rushed to calm her down and got her onto the changing table, only to realize we were completely out of diapers in our usual stash. In that moment of chaos, I remembered that Janet often tucks a few extra diapers into her handbag whenever she takes the baby out for walks. Luckily, her bag was sitting close by, near the baby counter. I reached for it, driven purely by urgency. Inside, I found 2 diapers. Relieved, I reached in to grab one, but as I pulled it out, something else fell to the floor with a soft thud. I looked down, and what I saw made my heart sink. It was an opened pack of condoms. The kind we never use. It was supposed to contain 3, but only 1 remained. I frantically searched the bag to see if the other 2 had merely fallen inside, but they were nowhere to be found. That meant, unmistakably, 2 had been used. Trying to stay composed despite the storm that had just erupted in my mind, I pocketed the condom pack and focused on changing the baby. My hands were trembling slightly, but I went through the motions. When Janet emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel and humming to herself, I calmly placed our daughter into her crib, then turned to face her. Without preamble, I pulled the condom pack from my pocket and asked her about it. Janet's initial reaction was as swift as it was unsettling. She morphed into a version of herself I barely recognize. Calculated, cool, dismissive. She outright denied the condoms were hers, then shifted the narrative, suggesting I had produced them from my own pocket as some sort of setup. I was stunned by how effortlessly she spun that tale. I told her clearly, I had found them in her bag, right where she keeps the baby's diapers. She smirked and retorted, "But you just pulled it from your pocket, didn't you?" As my frustration mounted, she burst into laughter. "Oh, poor you, look at that puppy face," she said, almost cooing, before adding, "I was just messing with you." She winked as if to say it was all harmless fun, but to me, it wasn't funny. It was terrifying. The lie was clear. We haven't used condoms in months, since she's been breastfeeding and her menstrual cycle hadn't returned. We hadn't needed to use protection. That had been a mutual decision, and nothing about that had changed, at least not that she had shared with me. So, I pressed further. "If we haven't been using them, and your cycle hasn't returned, why were these in your bag?" She casually replied that her cycle had returned recently, and she thought it best to be prepared. That alone was surprising. But I still had the pressing question, what happened to the other 2? She laughed again, dismissing the seriousness of the situation. "It's actually kind of a funny story," she said, as if trying to sell me on a sitcom plot. According to her, she had gone out the previous evening with some friends, and one of them, Kyle, ended up in a flirtatious exchange with a stranger. Things escalated, and apparently they needed protection. So, being the good friend she is, she lent them 2 condoms from the fresh pack she had just purchased. I stared at her, silent. She looked me in the eye and said I could call Kyle to confirm, but what would be the point of that? If she was lying, he would undoubtedly back her up. I told her flat out that I didn't buy the story and she needed to come clean. That's when her demeanor shifted again. She started crying, claiming I didn't trust her. She said she was deeply hurt, that I couldn't possibly understand what she was going through. She brought up her postpartum depression, said she was struggling every day just to function, and here I was, accusing her of infidelity. Her words were emotional daggers, each one intended to make me question myself. But they didn't work this time. Normally, I'm the one who apologizes after our arguments. I'm the one who smooths things over, who takes the step to make peace. But not this time. I didn't feel I had done anything wrong. I needed to snoop through her things. Since that confrontation, Janet has withdrawn. She stays curled up in bed all day with the curtains drawn, saying the brightness bothers her. She refuses to eat, barely speaks. I don't know what she does when I'm not around, but the energy in the house has become heavy, stale, like we're both holding our breath, waiting for the next fracture. I might argue I should be more empathetic, considering her claims of postpartum depression. But should that be a free pass for lying? For bizarre stories about distributing condoms like party favors? If she's using her mental health as a get-out-of-jail-free card, we're dealing with something much deeper than a simple marital spat. She's not talking to me. I haven't reached out either. I don't see the point. The trust is broken. Her story doesn't hold up. Her actions suggest guilt more than any explanation she's offered, and honestly, the way she twisted things, made jokes, used tears. Some commenters suggested I should have packed my own emergency condom. Who knows, maybe next time I'll find clown makeup and a red rubber nose in the diaper bag, and she'll tell me it's for managing stress. Our history together goes back over 6 years. We met at a friend's party. She was dazzling, funny, confident, beautiful. We clicked instantly. We spent the entire night talking and laughing, dancing like we were the only two people in the room. But I made one critical mistake. I didn't get her number. I wasn't a party person, and I only went because a friend had pushed me to attend. Afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I asked my friend about her, but he said she wasn't someone he knew well. She was a colleague's friend, someone who had come along by chance. He was married at the time, and understandably didn't want to risk any misunderstandings among his colleagues. The idea of being seen as flirting with Janet, someone they didn't even know personally, made him extremely cautious. But I kept nudging him, not willing to let the opportunity slip through my fingers. Finally, after some persistent convincing, he managed to get Janet's number for me. I didn't text her right away. I held on to her number for an entire week, staring at it every now and then, unsure of what to say. I didn't want to come across as overeager or desperate. Janet was stunning, easily the most attractive woman at the party, and I figured she probably had several men vying for her attention that night. I gathered enough courage to reach out. My message was casual, respectful, and laced with just a hint of hope. To my surprise and immense relief, she responded. Not only that, she told me she had regretted not asking for my number too. That one sentence melted away all my nervousness. From that point, everything clicked. Our conversations flowed effortlessly. She was witty, charming, and refreshingly honest. We started going out, slowly but steadily building a connection. At the time, she was working part-time at a local boutique. When I asked her if she planned to look for a full-time job, she said no, quite confidently. She didn't want the kind of commitment that came with a 9-to-5 lifestyle. She wanted freedom, the ability to live life on her own terms, unburdened by rigid schedules and office politics. That should have raised a red flag for me. Someone openly averse to structure might not adapt well to the constraints of a long-term relationship, but instead, I admired her spirit. She was living the life I had secretly envied. Our relationship continued to blossom. After 2 years of dating, I proposed. She said yes, and we tied the knot in a small, intimate ceremony attended by close friends and family. Janet didn't want an extravagant wedding. She thought it was wasteful. Instead, she suggested we use the money for a honeymoon, and I agreed. We spent 15 days exploring Europe, living like carefree adventurers, soaking in new cultures and cuisines. It was magical. A little over a year and a half into our marriage, Janet discovered she was pregnant. The news came as a shock to both of us. We hadn't planned for it. We had envisioned a few more years of travel and spontaneity before taking that leap. Janet panicked. She wasn't ready. She even told me she was considering terminating the pregnancy. That conversation shook me. I've always loved children and look forward to being a father. Still, I respected her autonomy. I never pressured her into having kids, but now that she was pregnant, even if it was unplanned, I couldn't help but hope she'd reconsider. I expressed how much it meant to me and gently encouraged her to think it through. After much back and forth and a great deal of soul-searching on her part, she decided to keep the baby. Pregnancy was hard on Janet. As expected, the physical changes and emotional rollercoaster were intense, but it went beyond that. Because I had persuaded her to carry the pregnancy to term, she often vented her frustrations on me. Every hormonal outburst, every tearful moment, seemed directed at me. I became her emotional punching bag. And I took it all, patiently, because I felt partly responsible. I had pushed her toward a path she wasn't ready for, and the least I could do was support her every step of the way. Fortunately, her pregnancy was complication-free, but emotionally, it was draining for both of us. When our daughter arrived, I thought things would improve. I was wrong. Janet seemed even more distant. Her mood swings intensified. She looked at our daughter not with joy or affection, but with a sense of resignation. The nights were long and sleepless, and even though I offered to take shifts, she remained perpetually exhausted and irritable. I attributed her behavior to the usual post-birth exhaustion. But the darkness around her never lifted. She began to express feelings of entrapment, saying she felt like a prisoner in her own life. She missed her independence, her carefree outings, her spontaneous adventures. So, I arranged for therapy sessions. The counselor diagnosed her with postpartum depression. It was painful to hear, but it made sense. I did everything I could to help her reclaim some semblance of freedom. I hired a full-time nanny so she could have time for herself. I encouraged her to go out, see her friends, reconnect with the world beyond diapers and bottles. 2 months after our daughter's birth, Janet resumed her old social life. She started going out more often, dressing up, laughing again. It made me hopeful. The therapist had said a happy mother makes for a well-adjusted child, and I clung to that belief. But 7 months into our daughter's life, I stumbled upon the condom in her bag. Everything began to unravel. Janet, in the face of confrontation, tried every possible angle: gaslighting, deflection, emotional guilt. But I didn't fold this time. I told her clearly if she believed she could lie her way out of this, she was mistaken. I wasn't going to let it go, not until she told me the truth. But she didn't open up, so I started digging. Checking her phone was the obvious route, but Janet guarded it like a vault. Even in her sleep, she kept it tucked under her pillow. She had always been like that, obsessively private about her devices. In the past, I didn't think much of it, but now, every little habit seemed suspicious. I couldn't simply ask to see her phone either. That would trigger another emotional meltdown and accusations of distrust. I felt stuck, lost. I started contemplating more creative tactics. Maybe I needed to distract her long enough to check her messages. Perhaps I could enlist our daughter's help. After all, babies love shiny objects, and Janet's phone had a glittery case. Or, in a moment of bold desperation, I even considered spilling a drink on her phone by accident just to get my hands on it. Ridiculous, I know. But when you're up against a seat, sometimes you start thinking like a spy. Then came another update. I was on the verge of hiring a private investigator, but before I made that leap, I decided to go down the old school path, stalking social media. Janet's profile was clean, suspiciously so. But then I noticed a photo of her with Kyle, her supposed friend. Something about it didn't sit right. I clicked on his profile and fell into a rabbit hole. That's when I found out Kyle was married and had a toddler. Digging through Kyle's social media presence painted a very different picture than the carefree single wingman Janet had described. He had a family wife who posted regularly about their toddler's milestones, birthday celebrations, and quiet Sunday mornings at home. That contradicted Janet's story completely. She claimed Kyle was just a casual friend who had hooked up with someone during their night out, needing a couple of condoms she generously provided. But a married man with a toddler, out partying and needing help in that way? The story started to collapse under its own weight. This revelation opened up a floodgate of doubt. If she could lie about Kyle's background, what else was she hiding? Was he really just a friend? Or was he something more? The possibility gnawed at me relentlessly. I couldn't shake the image of her laughing off my concerns, winking at me like this was all a joke. But this was my family, my marriage, none of it was funny. I tried to stay composed, to think rationally, but my mind spiraled into worst-case scenarios. I imagined secret rendezvous, late-night texts, moments shared in dimly lit corners of crowded bars. It was agonizing, and yet I still had no concrete proof, just suspicions, inconsistencies, and a gut feeling that refused to be silenced. That night, while Janet was out meeting friends, I sat in the nursery, watching our daughter sleep. Her tiny chest rose and fell with each breath. She was so innocent, so unaware of the storm brewing around her. I couldn't let this mess affect her. Whatever happened next, I had to stay grounded for her sake. But deep down, I knew the relationship as I had known it was slipping through my fingers. I wasn't just dealing with infidelity. I was confronting the collapse of trust, the erosion of shared dreams, and the painful realization that the woman I married might not be the person I thought she was. And that's when I made a decision. I wouldn't just confront Janet again. I would confront the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or painful it might be. When Janet first told me that Kyle was the one making out with a guy at a bar and needed the condom, I paused. Something about it just didn't sit right. My mind instantly jumped to Kyle's family, her husband, her child. I couldn't help but think, wait a second, does Kyle's husband know about this? The thought nagged at me, and I knew I couldn't just let it slide. So I approached Janet with what I hoped would come off as an olive branch. Hey, I told her. I'm sorry for doubting you about the condom thing. If you say it was for Kyle, I believe you. She smiled, probably thinking I was finally back on her side. I followed up by asking, does Kyle do this kind of thing often? Without missing a beat, Janet began recounting several stories, laughing while she described how Kyle had supposedly hit on men at various bars. I listened carefully, not because I believed her, but because I needed to let her think I did. She was spinning this web with confidence, but I was already preparing to pull the rug out from under her. After she finished regaling me with what she seemed to consider funny anecdotes, I decided it was time to drop the bomb. That's funny, I said casually. By the way, isn't Kyle married, and doesn't she have a toddler? Janet's entire demeanor changed in an instant. She froze like she'd been caught in a lie, which, of course, she had. Her smile disappeared, replaced by frantic stammering. No, that's not what I meant, she said quickly. It's just healthy flirting, nothing serious. But I didn't let her off the hook. You just shared multiple stories about her picking up guys from bars. Why would she need a condom for just flirting? That's when she reached for her classic deflection tool. Oops, did I say Kyle? Silly me. Pregnancy brain. I meant Kate, my single friend. Kyle's the responsible one. She doesn't do any of that. The speed and ease with which she shifted the story stunned me. It was like watching a professional actor switch roles mid-performance. I chuckled bitterly. Wow, that's impressive, but come on, you don't have to protect Kyle. Or are you actually worried that I might tell her husband? That's when her mask slipped again. Yes, she admitted quickly. Please don't do that. It would ruin their marriage. They have a baby, and she really does love her husband. It was just meaningless fun, nothing more. That was all I needed to hear. The way she pleaded didn't sound like someone defending a friend. It sounded like someone begging to cover up her own tracks. I stared at her, knowing deep down that the stories weren't about Kyle at all. They were hers. Every tale she'd told, every flirtation, every bar hookup, it was Janet she was describing, not Kyle, but she still wouldn't admit it. So I took another route. I don't feel comfortable knowing Kyle is cheating on her husband. I think I should tell him everything. That sent her into a panic. She started screaming, accusing me of being self-righteous. Who made you the morality police? She yelled. Why are you acting like some saint? But I stayed calm. I'm not listening to excuses anymore, I said. I'm going to tell Kyle's husband. Her reaction was immediate. She broke down crying, her voice cracking, her tears falling freely. It was the closest she'd come to a confession, and I could sense it. But I wasn't ready to hear it, not yet. I didn't want her getting away with her lies so easily. I didn't want a confession that would be followed by crocodile tears and empty apologies. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done. I wanted her to understand that her betrayal had real consequences, not just for me, but for everyone involved. So, I took it one step further. I messaged Kyle directly on Instagram. I told her Janet had confessed something explosive. Then, I sent her the "Why are you doing this to me?" she cried. "Open the door. Why are you destroying everything? Why can't you trust me?" I could hear her muffled voice through the door, and then she yelled something I hadn't expected. "He's not opening the door. God knows what he's about to do." Kyle called me next. Her voice was urgent, almost frantic. "Please," she said, "just listen to Janet, hear her out." But I was done listening. I told her the next thing I'd do was send those recordings to her husband. That shut her down instantly. Then, finally, Kyle broke. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling. "What Janet told you, that wasn't me, it was her. She's been cheating on you for over 4 months." The words didn't shock me, I already knew, but hearing someone else say it brought a strange kind of closure. I asked her why she hadn't stopped Janet. She hesitated, then replied, "We tried. The girls and I, we told her it was wrong. But she said she deserved this, that she gave you a beautiful baby and that should buy her some freedom." The logic made me sick. I had given her everything, love, support, freedom, and she'd repaid me with betrayal. I told Kyle to come over and to bring her husband. Maybe that was extreme, maybe I was going too far, but at that moment, I didn't care. I needed Kyle's husband to know what kind of person Janet really was. I needed him to know that his wife had been used as a scapegoat in a story so twisted it could break families apart. Kyle agreed to come but begged me not to show the recordings. "Janet's a good liar," she said. "If my husband hears those tapes, he might believe them. He might doubt me." I agreed, but only because Kyle was being honest with me now. Within an hour, she was at my house. I stayed locked in the room until she arrived. When she did, I heard Janet screaming from the hallway. "Why are you here? I told you I'd handle it. Just go away. I'll take care of this." But Kyle didn't back down. She stood her ground, yelling back, "Don't you dare put this on me. You dragged me into your mess." I stepped out as Kyle's husband tried to calm the chaos. He asked Janet to explain her side of the story. Janet looked at Kyle, who silently warned her not to lie. And then it happened. Janet broke down. Through sobs and gasps she confessed. The stories she told me weren't Kyle's. They were hers. She had been going out, picking up men, sleeping with them, and lying to my face for months. Kyle's husband stood there, silent at first, processing what he'd just heard. His face moved from confusion to disbelief, then settled into quiet fury. He didn't say much, just nodded slowly, gave Janet a look of pure disappointment, and turned to leave. Kyle followed him, glancing back at me with a small nod of gratitude, maybe even sorrow. As the door shut behind them, Janet collapsed to the floor, crying uncontrollably. But I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, hollow quiet. The damage had been done, and now everyone knew the truth. Kyle's husband stood frozen, visibly shaken as Janet's confession hung heavy in the air. His face twisted with disbelief as the truth sank in. This wasn't just about an affair. It was about betrayal layered with manipulation. Janet hadn't just cheated, she had thrown her own friend under the bus in a desperate attempt to cover her tracks. His voice rose, cutting through the tension like a knife. "This is the kind of person you've been friends with?" he yelled at Kyle. "She was about to destroy everything we built." After the chaos of the confrontation, Kyle and her husband stood up. Kyle's expression had hardened into one of absolute resolve. "Don't you ever contact me again," she said, her voice calm but fierce. "I love my husband and my family. You're not worth losing them over." Janet, clearly unraveling, reached for Kyle's hand, crying. But Kyle shrugged her off with a firm shake of the head and walked out without another word. Once they were gone, Janet turned her fury toward me. Her tears had transformed into venom. "Are you happy now?" she snapped. "What did you gain from humiliating me like that in front of my friend and her husband? Is this what men do when they're hurt?" I stared at her, unflinching. "That woman card? Yeah, it's expired," I said coldly. "You've used every excuse in the book: pregnancy, postpartum, stress. But now it's time for you to face the music. And what you saw tonight, that was just the beginning. You think that was humiliation? No, that was just the beginning. The real consequences are still coming." She looked stunned. Her lower lip trembled as I continued. "You said you deserved to cheat on me because you gave me a baby. So now, I'm going to give you what you actually deserve. Just wait." With that, I left the room and headed into the guest bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded, but my resolve had never been stronger. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, laying out the entire situation. I asked him to search for any legal openings that could help me secure full custody of our daughter. I wasn't just angry, I was determined. My lawyer listened intently. He said if I could collect enough evidence showing that Janet's lifestyle was unsafe for a child, her drinking, her partying, the revolving door of strange men, then he could build a compelling case focused on child safety. "We're not arguing infidelity," he told me. "We're building a case around her being an unfit parent." It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to fight. I had to protect my little girl from a household filled with lies, betrayal, and recklessness. She deserved stability. She deserved love. She deserved better. Meanwhile, Janet had no idea what I was preparing behind closed doors. She assumed my silence meant I'd eventually forgive her. She cooked meals, left apology notes, even baked a cake that read, "I'm sorry," in pink frosting. She brought flowers, cards, and pleaded with tearful eyes. She thought time would dull my pain. But she was wrong. Nearly a month later, my lawyer returned with the finalized divorce papers. I handed them to Janet without a word. Her face drained of color as she unfolded the documents. "What is this?" she whispered. "How could you do this to me?" After the lawyer left, I looked her in the eye. "Pack your things," I said simply, "and leave." She broke down, collapsing onto the couch. "Please," she sobbed. "Let's fix this. For the baby. We can make it work." But I shook my head. She tried to hug me, but I pushed her away gently but firmly. "You made your choices, now live with them." "But I have nowhere to go," she said, her voice breaking. I laughed bitterly. "Not my problem. I gave you everything. Now I'm giving you what you earned, your freedom. Isn't that what you always wanted?" She lashed out, threatening to take every last cent from me. "I'll bleed you dry," she spat. "Good luck hiring a lawyer," I shot back. "The good ones don't work for free, unless of course you plan to pay them the same way you paid your boyfriends." That hit her hard. She stormed toward our daughter's nursery, but I blocked her path. "You're not taking her," I said. "She's not going to live on the streets with you." "You're ripping me away from my daughter," she screamed, tears falling uncontrollably. "You were never interested in being a mother," I said. "You just wanted the title without the responsibility. I'm doing you a favor. Now you can finally be free." Eventually, she packed her bags. Her hands trembled as she zipped the last suitcase. With one final glance, she walked out the door. I watched her go, feeling an odd mix of relief and sadness. My lawyer began building the custody case with relentless precision. We documented every instance of Janet's neglect, every party, every night out, every hangover that left her too tired to feed or comfort our baby. He compiled a dossier that painted a clear picture. Janet was unstable, unreliable, and unfit to care for a child. The legal battle ahead promised to be grueling, but I was ready. I was fighting for more than just custody. I was fighting for my daughter's future. And Janet? She had built her life like a tower of cards, each lie a fragile floor stacked on the one below. It took just one gust of truth for everything to collapse. Funny how playing detective on social media had led to the biggest revelation of my life. I peeled back every layer of her deception, one by one, like a pungent onion. And now she was the one drowning in tears. The custody battle loomed like a high-stakes game of Monopoly, except the prize wasn't Park Place or Boardwalk. It was the well-being of an innocent child, and in this game, Janet's record made her about as trustworthy as a car dealer in a clown suit. I strapped in. I was ready to go to war. And if Janet still wanted to play the victim, she better be ready. Because I wasn't just bringing anger, I was bringing evidence. A whole deck's worth, the kind of evidence no court could ignore. Janet was about to learn the hardest truth of all: actions have consequences, and when those actions endanger a child, the consequences are swift, severe, and final. Even in the aftermath, as I walked through the quiet halls of my home, there was no sense of triumph, just clarity. I wasn't celebrating Janet's downfall. I was mourning what could have been. The dreams we once built together were now rubble at my feet, but amidst the wreckage stood my daughter, innocent, blameless, and everything that mattered. Every step I took from that point forward wasn't for revenge. It was for her, to give her a life where she'd never have to question whether her parents' love was real, or whether the home she grew up in was built on lies. This wasn't just about exposing a cheater, it was about drawing a line that said, enough, no more gaslighting, no more manipulation, no more using motherhood as a shield for betrayal. I would stand my ground, not just as a betrayed husband, but as a father willing to do whatever it took to protect his child. Because when trust breaks, it's painful, but when a parent fails their child, that's unforgivable. Janet had made her choices, now I was making mine. After all the dust had settled, it became increasingly clear that Janet never really intended to fight for custody of our daughter. Despite all the drama and emotional theatrics, when it came down to the responsibilities of parenthood, she backed away. She didn't have a stable job, no fixed place to stay, and her interest in keeping the baby was, at best, lukewarm. It was evident from the start that motherhood had never truly been part of her plan. However, what she lacked in maternal instinct she more than made up for in audacity. Janet went absolutely ballistic trying to squeeze alimony out of me. I can't disclose the exact amount we settled on, but what I paid her was a mere fraction of what she initially demanded. And to be honest, it was worth every penny, just to finally have her out of my life. Sometime later, Kyle and her husband dropped by to see the baby. It was an unexpected but thoughtful gesture. Kyle looked somber, almost guilty. She apologized for not warning me sooner about Janet's hookups. She confessed that she'd tried to talk Janet out of her reckless behavior, but her advice had fallen on deaf ears. She expressed regret, not just for me, but for the baby, who had been caught in the middle of all this. Kyle shared that Janet had frequently complained about how fussy and difficult the baby was, often dramatizing her postpartum struggles. It was obvious, Kyle said, that Janet had exaggerated her situation to justify her detachment. Her claims of postpartum depression had become more of a shield than a condition, something she wielded to excuse her absence and irresponsibility. Kyle's husband added that Janet had recently reached out to them for support, but instead of sympathy, she was met with rejection. He had turned her away. Since then, Janet had been drifting from one friend's couch to another. Word had it that her drinking had worsened, her instability becoming more apparent with each passing week. I listened quietly, and when Kyle asked if there was anything they could do, babysitting, errands, anything, I thanked her sincerely. Their offer was generous but unnecessary. My parents had moved in with me, and I'd also hired a full-time nanny. My daughter was surrounded by care, love, and structure, everything Janet failed to provide. I mentioned that maybe, someday, I'd let my daughter meet her mother, but not now. Right now, she was safe, content, and deeply loved. That was all that mattered. And so here we are, I've got full custody of my little girl, and Janet is off wandering through her life like a cautionary tale. She's couch surfing, drowning in cheap booze, and clinging to the shards of a life she shattered with her own hands. Jeanette once thought motherhood was a cage. She believed freedom came from abandoning responsibility, but in the end, she lost everything that truly mattered. And as for her dreams of lavish alimony, let's just say her odds of hitting the jackpot are better if she buys a lottery ticket while riding a unicorn through Times Square. But me, I'm here, I'm steady. I'm the anchor in my daughter's life. To every single parent out there fighting through chaos and heartbreak, keep going. There's peace on the other side. There's love, laughter, and yes, even diapers and sleepless nights, and all of it is worth it. So here's to a future built on truth, love, and resilience, a future where one little girl grows up knowing her father stood tall when it mattered most. Because at the end of the day, the real victory isn't just in winning a custody battle, it's in creating a life where your child feels safe, cherished, and never second-guessed, and that's exactly what I intend to do every single day.